My name is Severina McGill. I teach human rights law at Jindal Global Law School, and we're going to be doing a module on human rights of women for the ePathshala UGC. The first module is on the need for human rights of women. We will have three main learning objectives today. Number one, to introduce the inferior social position of women in India as well as globally. Number two, to become aware of why and how women's inequality exists and is often perpetuated. And number three, to become familiar with the presence of gender bias within laws and policies within recent history in India as well as across the world. Women's disadvantaged social position throughout her life is often referred to as the cycle of violence. The strong patriarchal culture in India is reflected and manifested in various forms. Examples can include son preference and subsequent female infanticide or female feticide, more money being spent on male children's health and education, young men having higher levels of choice and decision-making power over their own life choices and decisions, such as the level of education, choice of subject, location of study, and age and partner of marriage. Men's age of marriage is often later than women's, and this gives them more time to finish their education. Grooms also receive and do not have to pay dowry. Traditionally, women have not been included as subjects in the definitions of human rights law. The life experience of women has therefore not been included in the content of law. The needs of men has been treated as the standard to which all rights apply to all humans. For example, when we look at torture, disappearance, or bodily injuries inflicted upon women, the difference in their experiences from those of men is often not recognized within laws. Examples include sexual violence as a weapon of war and the consequences of enforced disappearances upon women and their surviving family members. Blindness towards the inequalities between men and women has been referred to as gender myopia. This is where the blindness to different experiences has constantly not been included in law and has played a role in how rules of society develop and how women are excluded from becoming the ones who can benefit from human rights. The sex ratio in India is a good example of gender inequality. The UN has stated that the natural global average of sex ratio at birth is around 105 male births per 100 female births. This equates to a naturally occurring 952 female births to 1,000 male births. In 1991, the Indian census showed that there were 948 female births compared to 1,000 male births. As there was social concern that the female birth rate was artificially being interfered with, such as because of female feticide and female infanticide, due to a socio-cultural preference for male children, the Indian government decided to introduce a new piece of legislation. In 1994, the government passed the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act. This banned sex determination of fetuses, and later the choice of sex for a fetus if IVF was being performed. Despite this legislation, by 2012 to 2014, the census figures showed that the sex ratio was 906 female births per 1,000 male births. The number of females being born had therefore fallen even lower than when the Act was passed. The continual decline of the sex ratio, even after the introduction of legislation to try and ban sex determination, demonstrates that law in itself is not able to change social values and social preferences. These are pervasive cultural preferences that exist separate from law. According to the National Crimes Records Bureau figures, from 2013, there were a total of 3,09,546 incidents of crimes against women in 2013. Of these offences, the most common crimes in descending order were cruelty by husbands or his relatives at 118,866, assault on a woman to outrage her modesty at 70,739, kidnapping and abduction, rape, insults to women's modesty, and dowry crimes. All of the above listed crimes are committed against women and overwhelmingly perpetrated by men. Cruelty, rape, assault, and dowry particularly demonstrate male dominance over women and their bodies. These crimes are typically perpetrated to exert control and to create fear, to reinforce a social hierarchy of power, both within the family and within society. These reinforce men's privileged and more powerful social positions. A close examination of the kidnapping and abduction figures for women in Delhi by various studies have established that many cases of kidnapping and abduction are filed by young women's families, often by their parents after the young woman has eloped with a lover. In most cases, the young woman has eloped with a lover. In many of these cases, the woman is under the age of 18. This has led Rukmini Sen to ask whether these are cases of bhagna, as in to elope or to run away, which is the result of a woman's exercise of agency, a choice that she has made, or bhagna, as in to be forcefully taken away, for example, to be kidnapped or abducted without any agency or choice. The filing of a kidnapping report reinforces the notion of daughters as property who are not allowed to make their own decisions, and that any decision is taken without the expressed consent of the family must be controlled and curtailed. According to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, women in India account for only 9.5% of landholders. Women's low ownership of land and of property results in them being largely dependent upon their male members of their family. According to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, women in India account for only 9.5% of landholders. Women's low ownership of land and property results in them being dependent upon male members of their kin for their shelter. As the number of female property and landowners is so low, many women may be forced to accept certain living conditions, such as domestic violence, as they generally have less influence in decision-making. Not owning land or property weakens women's access to capital and financial loans that may have increased their ability to make choices based on a wider range of options. The weak social and economic position of women in society reinforces their inferiority and vulnerability. Combined with a strong patriarchal attitude, the safety of women, even in the public sphere, is less secure than men's. The Delhi gang rape and resulting death of a 23-year-old young woman in December 2012 highlighted the fear of and threat of actual violence women experience when accessing public spaces. Women started protesting across India, not just against the attackers of the Nirbhaya rape and demanding they be caught, but also voicing their frustration with the state at their lack of action to ensure women's safety in the public space. Internationally, women's social and economic security is less secure than men's. On average, 100 women a year are killed by their current or former male partner in the United Kingdom. That is 10 times higher than the number of men killed by their female current or former partner per year. In the USA, the number of American troops killed in Afghanistan and Iraq between 2001 and 2012 was 6,488. The number of American women who were murdered by their current or ex-male partner during the same period of time was 11,766. If governments are aware that intimate partner violence disproportionately affects one sex, why are governments not responding more comprehensively to fulfill women's human right to life? One reason why prevention and redressal services for violence against women and women's services generally are poorly funded and often have insecure funding, for example, to not have permanent funding every year, is that there is a lack of prioritization at the decision-making and budget allocation level. In the United States, it is estimated that each year for domestic violence and sexual assault services, the budget allocated is $413 million. This is less than $50 for every woman who is known to experience a form of domestic abuse. The annual budget for defense is estimated to be $640,221 billion. This difference in budget allocation demonstrates the lack of priority given to women's services. More central funds are needed for providing domestic violence shelters, rehabilitation and therapy services for perpetrators and survivors, and early intervention programs, fast-track courts, and training for the police, health, and judicial services on how to recognize and appropriately respond to abusive relationships in an informed and sensitive manner, not just in the US, but globally. Gender discrimination also negatively affects women in the West, with consistently women earning less than men. More than half of a century after the United States passed the Equal Pay Act, and 45 years after similar legislation in the UK was passed, women across the world earn 77% of the amount paid to men. Motherhood is also financially punished. Over a woman's lifetime, women who have 2 children will earn 25% less than childless women. Statistics such as these demonstrate an ingrained discrimination against women and lack of gender sensitivity within the workplace. One question to be addressed is, why is it that the financial consequences of reproduction, necessary for the survival of the human race as a whole, and of course a result of both men and women, should be disproportionately borne by women? Gender stereotypes that define men as hard-working and with fewer emotions, and women as naturally more caring and happier within the domestic sphere, are socially constructed. The broad legal recognition in most countries in the world for maternity leave is present, but very few legal provisions for paternity leave demonstrate how stereotypes can shape legal provisions. The lack of parental leave for parents, whereby both parents may claim a right to look after their child, removes child-caring decisions from parents and forces women to take time off work, as men simply do not have the legal rights to parental leave. Such restrictive policies often force women to take leave, even if the couple would have preferred for the man to be the primary caregiver. These policies demonstrate not only gender stereotyping regarding the roles men and women play within the family unit, but also gender pigeonholing, where movement beyond these stereotypes is restricted by law. When the policy that enabled men to take leave was first introduced in Sweden, only 0.5% of all paid parental leave was paid to men. The low uptake of the new policy was likely due to a lack of awareness about the policy and how to access it, but also due to entrenched social stereotypes that care work for children was seen as feminine, and social pressure existed to not break such barriers. The Swedish government has continued to introduce policies to try to break such stereotypes and to provide incentives for men to utilize provisions available to them. In 1995, the Swedish government announced that for every family where both parents took 1 month of leave, an extra month of paid leave would be given to the family to look after their child. Whilst this was technically a gender-neutral policy as it applied to both parents, it was clearly aimed at trying to get men to take at least 1 month of leave for childcare. The policy quickly came to be known as Daddy Month, and it has been credited as helping to redress the imbalance between men and women in the distribution of childcare in Sweden. In 2002, the Swedish government went further and gave families where both parents took at least 2 months of leave to look after their child an additional 2 months of leave for the family. In 2014, men were taking 25% of all paid parental leave, and the gap between men and women's leave is said to be continually shrinking. Recognizing that families often have significant financial commitments, Sweden also provides men and women with 80% of their salary when they take parental leave. This module has introduced how the life cycle of violence against women and girls includes forms of violence that are typically only experienced by women. These forms of violence may be extreme, where they result in the ending of life of females, from sex-determined abortions to sati. They may also be more subtle and yet still be pervasive within society, from greater control over women's choices to violence against their person. This is reflected in access to education and employment, ownership of property, and choices women may not have over their life direction and bodies that are freely available to men. This module has also given an introduction to the historical lack of participation of women in significant numbers in decision-making positions, has resulted in women's needs often being underfunded and their labour has been undervalued and pigeonholed into often unpaid forms of care work. Without laws and policies that aim to promote a more equal and accommodative society that breaks down constructed gender stereotypes and builds solutions to encourage greater gender-based equality, women are likely to continue experiencing oppression. This module on human rights of women will introduce theories of what equality can be understood to mean, laws and case studies to promote why human rights of women need greater attention, and how laws can be shaped and structured to increase women's lived equality. Thank you.